Well, dear guest, I'm happy to host this webinar on Iraq today. My name is Shadil Nawaftaqa. I'm the Middle East advisor in the Global D1. The Global D1 is an international business club based in Paris. We aim to enhance and foster business relations between the East and the West. Therefore, we used to gather experts, business experts, also political experts from the Middle East and from Europe to enhance this relation. Today, we're going to speak about and explore the business opportunities for tomorrow's Iraq. You know, Iraq is currently in a phase of stabilization and reconstruction. However, the situation is quite fragile and volatile due to the persistent internal and regional tensions. To understand these challenges facing Iraq, I have with me valuable guests and experts today for the Global D1. I'll start by introducing Anne Gadel, who's a MENA analyst at the Jean Jaurès Foundation. She's also a contributor to the Institut Montaigne in France. I have also with me Louki-Géronimo, Richou. He's a parliamentary assistant at the French Senate. He works for the Iraqi-French Friendship Group. I've also with me Beaumont, who's a political researcher at Noria Research. At last but not least, I have with me Yesar and Maliki, who comes from Iraq. He's a Gulf analyst at the MENA London Institute. He's also a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute in Washington. And he's also an advisor at the Iraq Energy Institute in Baghdad. So I'm very happy to receive you today, dear friends. And I will start by giving the floor to Louki-Géronimo, who would speak about the institutional relation between Iraq and France. Please, Louki.
So hello, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be there today. So as I told you, my name is Louki-Géronimo Richou, and I'm the parliamentary advisor for Nicole Duranton, which is a French senator sitting on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and the deputy of Minister Sébastien Lecornu, president of the France-Iraq Interparliamentary Friendship Group. So I was led to go to Iraq and learn more about bilateral and institutional commercial relations when I worked for Joël Garriaud-Maylam, which is a senator for French people abroad. And with the help of the group's secretary, I identified the profiles of speakers, and I organized the hearings as well as the program of the trip in connection with the French embassy and the Quai d'Orsay services. So before giving the floor to Anne, Yesar, and Robin, I will briefly review the history of French entrepreneurship in Iraq. So first, as a reminder, the Second Gulf War caused a decline in French influence in Iraq and Lebanon. And as you know, when Saddam Hussein decided to seize Kuwait, he was convinced that he can count on France's support. Finally, François Mitterrand decided to side with the Americans, and we lost a lot of influence in Iraq. And instead, we chose to become closer with Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. But when George W. Bush invaded Iraq in 2003, France did not side with them. So we can tell that for a long time, Iraq was a closed country with a socialist and directed economy, leading to a lack of opportunity and investment. But today, with socioeconomic and political improvements, the efforts of modernization of the law, first by the legislator, Iraq offers a much better potential of investment. So to achieve this goal, Iraq has promulgated in 2006 the Iraq Investment Law. Between 2003, a bit before the votation of the law, and 2010, we have several entrepreneurs, such as big entrepreneurs, such as Lafarge, Renault Trucks, and Sanofi Aventis, that have chosen to set up their permanent offices in Baghdad and pay the French Business Center, which was in the red zone, but very protected by the French military. And they paid between like 80 and 100,000 euros per year in order to stay in the French Business Center. It was a building in front of the French embassy, like hosted by the embassy. But a majority of foreign investment goes to the oil industry, as Iraq has, as you know, the world's fourth largest proven oil reserves. And in addition, cement production and the construction sector are also offering interesting opportunities. So the National Investment Code that we spoke about a minute ago has been amended in December 2015 and includes several tax exemptions for permitted investments, including a 10 years tax holiday and duty-free import of essential equipment and materials. There is also today the networks of provincial investment commissions, even if they are not very efficient mostly, but well, they have been established. And however, on the other side, Iraq's national investment law restricts direct or indirect foreign ownership of natural resources, of banks, of insurance companies. Since 2013, foreign investments inflows have been negative, with Iraq struggling to attract foreign capital due to its significant security problems, also fragile institutions and lack of governance. And since the early legislative election of October 2021, the government has not yet been formed. So Iraqi government has been putting a lot of pressure on foreign companies to hire more local labor. And the national regulation remains, could we say that, quite opaque. So investors often find it difficult to resolve commercial disputes between Iraqi institutions and between them, and they find it difficult also to get paid on time. For instance, Orange, which had been present in Iraq since 2011, held an indirect more than 30% stake of Correct Telecom with a partner, and they have launched a lawsuit against the Iraqi state for expropriation in March 2019, estimated at more than $400 million of dollars. So regarding security, that is the second most mentioned point when we do auditions for when we receive French entrepreneurs that are willing to establish in the area. Much more than gunfires and much more than attacks, the problem is about bombs, about bombings, and not much can be done. The only way is like to guard the cars and the vehicles day and night. The security companies ask about 1,500 euros per day and per person, and the convoy with armored vehicles, armed men, and administrative authorization cost about 3,000 euros. So it's, as you see, it's quite expensive. Then a little point about news from today's Iraq, even if I know my colleagues are gonna explain it much better than I do. We can say that today, only large groups such as Total, Thales, Schneider, or Vinci are present. There are few companies, smaller companies overall, because the cost of setting up and the competition are tough. Iraq is indeed an open economy, and Italy and Germany in particular, but also Iran, or more surprisingly, maybe Brazil and Vietnam and India are setting up also a lot. And so it's quite difficult to take a new product or a new service in the market. In 2020, the French exports to Iraq fell by 20%, with the exception of mechanical equipment, some electrical and computer equipment as well. But at the same time, our imports as well from Iraq amounted to 57 million euros, which is down 70% year on year. So this evolution reflects the drop in our global demand in oil, mainly because of the COVID-19 health crisis, and also because some neighbors of Iraq are still more attractive. For instance, Jordan and the autonomous province of Kurdistan have a more stabilized framework that French companies still prefer. So policy reforms are still needed to alleviate investors' concerns. And there is a first encouraging step that I wanted to mention, that is a new online one-stop shop system for business registration that has been opened during the COVID-19 crisis. and it simplifies. Well, entrepreneurs told us at the Senate that it simplifies a lot the process that took dozens of separate steps before and several in-person visits, and now it can be completed in a few clicks. Really in a simple manner. Then I will briefly review the official visit of the French president in Iraq. So it was between the 27th and the 30th of August of last year. So Emmanuel Macron participated in an unprecedented conference with Egypt, Iran, Turkey, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. He stated that France has to remain present in order to fight against terrorism, and has a vocation to accompany Iraq in terms of defense, but also transports, energy, and infrastructure. In Mosul, he had a meeting with the Christian community, and he visited the Al-Nouri Mosque, where Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi proclaimed the caliphate in 2014. And some parliamentarians, some French senators mostly, regretted that the program of the trip did not include visits to French entrepreneurs or even just a specific point about French entrepreneurship. But he mentioned business during his main speech. And so, to conclude, we are doing a trip in June of this year with the French Iraq French group. So we have conducted numerous hearings with the Iraqi ambassador, the representative of the Kurdistan regional government, Mr. Ali Dolamari, senior officials from the ministry, and also Pierre Fournol, that is a lawyer at the Paris bar, and that is specialized in the implementation of French entrepreneurs in Iraq. So yes, to conclude, we can say that although investments are being made in various fields, the oil still obviously the biggest one. So the Iraqi Ministry of Industry has privatized more than 60 public companies in this sector. The challenge is therefore twofold. On the one hand, to diversify investments between other sectors than just the oil sector, and the other hand, to allay the fears linked to the security and to the institutional instability that some entrepreneurs can feel right now, in order to attract them to set up. So in Iraq, everything is complex, but nothing is impossible.
Thank you, Ricky. This was perfect. Thank you very much. And would you like to share with us some reflections from your side?
Definitely, because I'm going to give you an insight on mostly civil society, because I've been privileged to go to Iraq in 2021 to participate in roundtables gathering several people from the civil society. And then I'll give a regional perspective on what Louki has just said about French-Iraqi relations. And if we have time, I will talk about very briefly the aftermath of the elections and what it means. So first, as I told you, I was really privileged to go to Iraq in 2021 and to attend roundtables where lots of different people were gathered. We had Tishreen activists, but also scholars, MPs, civil servants, all sorts of people, very, very different backgrounds, and people who usually don't really speak to each other. And the challenge was to get them seated around one table and discuss fundamental matters like governance, institutions, politics, democracy, etc., etc. And there are three things that I think were really interesting and struck me from those talks. The first one is that civil society in Iraq is mobilized, and it's brilliant. And some people in particular are very much involved in politics and the future of Iraq. And they were all interested in a way to have a French perspective on their issues and to understand better some events that occurred in France, specifically the Yellow Vest movements, for instance, because it sort of resonated with the Tishreen movements in 2019. And in this period of persistent political and institutional stalemate for Iraq, we see that Iraq is confronted, just like France, with strong identity, social, political tensions and debates around democracy, around the place of the elites. And our interlocutors were really looking for cross discussions, for a French perspective on that. So I thought it was an insight that is worth sharing with you. When you go to Iraq, you know that some people are at least interested in having a French perspective on things. The second thing that I noticed was that there are very strong disparities between regions and governorates in Iraq. For instance, in Baghdad, the security situation is very important. You can see security vehicles and barriers everywhere, and there were still explosions and tensions around the green zone. In Najaf, where we were as well, the situation is completely different. What struck me is that in Mosul, we were in the Nineveh governorate, and specifically in Mosul, and the emergency is reconstruction. The stigma of Daesh is still present, and officials and civil society participants there really called for increased cooperation with the European countries for know-how, for material, for aid in general. And the third point from that is there's a sort of appetite to turn towards Europe and European countries. You know that the US has partially disengaged its troops from Iraq, which was a request from the political class and part of the militias. And this was done at the end of last year. And it caused concern among several groups, several people. And against this backdrop, there's a sort of tendency to turn and to trust more European countries, specifically countries like France, which did not engage in the 2003 war. And to that regard, just to give you a sort of a sense of that, I have funny anecdotes and surrealist discussions that I had with some people, some participants. They were really surprised. They were almost saying, what we need is our own de Gaulle or our own Napoleon. I was like, be careful what you wish for. But nevertheless, I think it's a funny and interesting anecdote to sort of give a gist of what is the state of mind there, even in Mosul. And the Arab world in general, and in Iraq in particular, they're very much inspired by our institutional system. And it leads me to sort of complete maybe what Louki-Géronimo has tackled, to give a more regional perspective on the French-Iraqi relations. It's my second point. So I know I'm not going to repeat what Louki-Géronimo just said, but basically after a long period of close ties between France and Iraq, stemming from the General de Gaulle's Arab policy and his successors, the invasion of 2003 led France a bit on the side of Iraqi affairs. But in 2014, the sense of urgency regarding ISIS, France returned to Iraq with air support to the international coalition. Then there were several official visits by President Hollande in 2014, 2017. And now France has a small contingent of men in the coalition, still in Iraq. But it's with the arrival of a new American administration that wants to complete what it started under Obama and Trump, the sort of pivot to Asia, leaving the Middle East, sharing the Middle East, nation building at home, foreign policy for the middle class, etc., etc. All of this led to a sort of disengagement, a perceived disengagement of the Americans from the region. And in the meantime, the region was mutating at a very, very fast pace, specifically after signing the Abraham Accords and the Al-Ula Accords, which marked the end of the so-called Gulf crisis. And so throughout 2021, we've seen a lot of changes in the region, and with against this backdrop, Iraq has tried to position itself as a pivotal, a regional pivot in the Middle East. And just like Louki-Géronimo said, President Macron, I think, gave a very strong signal that he was supporting Iraq in its strategy of acting as a mediator and as trying to balance the dynamics in this changing regional game. And the program of his September 2021 visit on the occasion of the Baghdad Regional Conference, which was, I think, our ticket to sort of re-enter the regional game via Iraq, it really marked the way that Macron wanted to show that France now sort of balances its relations with all the communities in Iraq, because he also visited the Kadhimiya, which is a very, very important point that was probably not very underlined in French media. this was actually really important that he did, because it marked the fact that he wanted to pay a visit and to pay respects to the Shia community, which had been probably a bit left aside in previous decades of French-Iraqi diplomatic relations. And with the issue of Daesh coming back, even at a low intensity, but nevertheless, it is coming back. I think it's more and more important to first be aware that it is a thing, it is a danger, but on the other hand, it is also possible, and it is expected of France and of French entrepreneurs to go back to Iraq. It requires a lot of security investments, but I think in the long run, it's gonna be a good thing. Very quickly, if I have to, I just want to tackle, just give a perspective on the political stalemate, the institutional stalemate that we've witnessed in the aftermath of the October elections. It's been 7 months now, and we don't have, there isn't a government in Iraq. One of the challenges in forming the government was to break out the logic of consensus and national unity to try to form the first majority government in Iraq since 2005. But what we are witnessing at the moment, still witnessing, is that rivalries and power games actually got the better of this logic, and it's now not really likely that Sadr will be able to do that, to achieve that. The main challenge was to get the coordination framework, the Shia House, Sadr and the coordination framework to get along, to get an agreement for the formation of the government. I'm not going to go into details also because it's very, very complicated and it changes every day. But for the moment, there's the Speaker of the Parliament that has been elected, but we're still looking for a government and a president. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean that all projects should be stopped or on hold, because I know that the French Treasury and the French Embassy in Iraq are really working hard, and also French institutions such as the Senate, for instance, they're really working really hard to implement the right financial and legal tools to help French companies get back to the Iraqi markets, which, as Louki-Géronimo underlined, is very competitive. And there are important contracts being signed or on the way to being signed in renewable energies, energy, transportation, infrastructure, etc., etc. And I think as a final note, I think it echoes really well the involvement and the visible involvement of the French ambassador in Baghdad and the French consul general in Erbil. And to end on a very positive note, let us remember that there will soon be a French consulate in Mosul as well. So it's a very strong sign of France and Iraq wanting to strengthen their ties.
Thank you, Anne. This was, as always, you do it perfect. Now I'll give the floor to Robin Beaumont. I don't know if you hear us, Robin.
Sure. So good afternoon, everybody, and many thanks indeed to the Global D1 team for hosting this event. I'm no entrepreneur, I'm no businessman. I'm a researcher in political science at a Paris-based research center called Noria Research. And I've been working on Iraq for about 10 years now, doing field work mostly on the relationship between the Iraqi state, Shia political parties and armed groups, and the Shia religious authority, and previously mostly in the north, and now mostly in Baghdad and the central and southern areas. So what I would like to do today is to give you a sense of where Iraq stands as a country, and it is indeed, in my opinion, a country which is eager to go forward and to welcome foreign investment. If you were to go to Baghdad today, you'd be surprised at how easy it is to enter the country and to move around in the city or from one governorate to the other. In central and southern Iraq, the only checkpoints you would encounter would probably be at the entrance of Najaf and Karbala. That is the two holiest sacred cities for Shia Islam. But apart from that, and apart from very specific locations in the north and the west, not only can you move as you please, but you would most certainly be very, very welcome. As far as access is concerned, it has never been as easy as it is now for individuals to go to Iraq. Since last spring, the citizens from 30 countries, I think, including the US, the European Union, the UK, Russia, China, can get a visa on arrival at the airport in Baghdad, which is unprecedented, and which testifies to a national commitment to attract foreign investment. Same with security, which has considerably improved to the point that should you go by car from Basra in the south to Erbil in the north, frankly, you wouldn't encounter any security issue. I think the only problem you might face would probably be with the Kurdish Peshmerga to enter Kurdistan. And the funny thing is that not that many people are aware of this or actually can benefit from it. Why? Because Iraq is now in an intermediary stage. It has been in effect stabilized, but all the protocols which were ruling the work of international partners during the war are still in force. So today you can walk or you can take a random taxi in Baghdad and even go from one governorate to another with public transportation and stay in a hotel as a foreigner without much risk. But almost nobody is doing it because international organizations like the UN, NGOs, foreign companies like, keep following their security protocols from before. You have many expats who live in the green zone and they never leave it. The French embassy personnel, which is not located within the green zone, are not allowed to leave the premises of the embassies. They're not even allowed to go to the restaurant. So we're still at this stage where the situation could allow for engaging more with the Iraqi social and economic fabric, but in fact, this does not really happen because of institutional inertia. And this, by the way, is not a picture we'll get from reading security reports like those that are produced daily by security analysis companies, because as a matter of fact, many of these companies play a role in perpetuating what I just described. I was just talking to one of them in Baghdad a few weeks ago, and he told me that they were struggling to find things to report on. So they literally identify each and every micro incident coming up, and for sure there are plenty, because they need to feed their clients with this narrative of a country which needs to be monitored every day for security issues. And I would like to stress something else. When you speak to people about Iraq, and even sometimes to people who have been working in or on Iraq, journalists, researchers, NGOs, you often get this description of Iraq as chaos or chaotic country or state or society. And what I would like to tell you first is that, well, there is no such thing. If somebody tells you about a country as chaos or chaotic, just means that they have been too lazy to go deeper in understanding how this country works. Even civil wars do not equate chaos. You know, a civil war is not the absence of order. It is the coexistence of several social orders. And there always is order. The challenge is to identify it. In the worst situations, even in the worst situations, people always create norms, rules, unwritten, unofficial rules, but rules nonetheless, which govern their ways of living, of interacting, and of trading, and even doing business. And our job as researchers is to study these ways, to understand them, and your job as business people is to understand them, to adapt to them. That means, for instance, knowing that, I don't know, in this part of the country, it is less useful to talk to the governor than to his advisor, because his advisor is the true leader, because he's from the most powerful local party. It can also mean that this, in this other part of the country where there is, I don't know, an access to the sea, you need to speak not only with the port authority, but also with the customs police, because both institutions are affiliated with different local armed groups and in competition with each other, and you need to make a deal with both of them. So Iraq is one of those countries where at first glance, things might not make sense to a new eye, but if you put enough time and energy, you will identify patterns, you will identify ways of working. And the best evidence of that is that you can see today in Iraq, particularly in Baghdad, but not only, the blossoming of a true entrepreneurial ecosystem, with startups being created in sectors such as logistics, the e-commerce, transportation, education. Just to take one example, I attended a few weeks ago an event in Baghdad for the first anniversary of the first Iraqi digital platform for online flight ticket booking, which is called the Sindibad. And that kind of initiatives is multiplying really by the day. So it's only about navigating the landscape. So what is the landscape in which you would have to navigate like this? Well, you can sum it up with three grand dynamics or three grand challenges facing Iraq. The first of these challenges would be the structure of the economy. And by that, I mean, of course, without anticipating on what is going to be said after me, but the dependency on the oil rent, which of course allows for great hopes, but which keeps the country structurally dependent. You know, Iraq's oil production has been multiplied by 3 since 2003. It accounts for the 65% of its GDP, 90% of the federal governance revenue, which means that, well, the economy largely depends on oil prices. And every year the budget is made and voted on based on an estimation of oil production. And every year, especially when there is a decline in oil prices, it has to be readjusted. And sometimes the government finds itself in an impossible situation where it cannot pay for public sector salaries. Public sector salaries, by the way, government employees in Iraq account for 40% of the jobs. That's Iraq's largest expenditure just before subsidies. And at the same time, and this is the paradox, Iraq remains unable to cover its own needs for refined oil. So Iraq is forced to spend up to $3 billion annually on fuel imports. So you have international organizations such as the IMF, who are pushing for programs aiming at promoting non-oil sectors and diversifying the exports, but there is still much to be done in that regard. So that's the first challenge. The second big challenge Iraq is facing is its relationship with its two major partners, meaning Iran and the US, because both of them give Iraq strong financial, economic, political, military assistance, but this assistance also reveals a power play, of course, between them. So this is only my opinion, but I would say that both Iran and the US have an interest in keeping Iraq at the same time stable, but weak. That's why it is unlikely that there will be an open confrontation between them on the Iraqi soil, but at the same time, both of them will keep interfering in Iraq's business to prevent the other to become hegemonic. You probably remember how Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general who was in charge of the Revolutionary Guard's external operations, was killed by an American drone in Baghdad in January 2020. And Iran has been funding, training, controlling effectively a number of Iraq's most sectarian and authoritarian political figures, including militia leaders who have grown in numbers and power in the wake of the war. And the third challenge, I will conclude with that, is the challenge of the political field. Because, you know, Iraq is one of the rare countries in the region with, and nobody says it actually, but with a multi-partisan system, with regular elections, with a dynamic political life, with changing alliances and coalitions. But however, this diversity does not at all equate fair political representation. The political field might be diverse, but in truth, it is dominated by and locked by a limited number of partisan and militarized groups, which disagree on everything but the power sharing arrangements which have been granting them tight control over politics and the economy. So what we have had since 2003 in Iraq is not a democratization process. It is a sharp transition from a one-party totalitarian regime to an authoritarian oligopoly over government and national and local administrations. And the war on the Islamic State resulted in the growing power of armed groups and their political arms in Baghdad, the most powerful of which having organized into a coalition which today is one of the two main political blocs in parliament. So in many places in the country, these groups who have been researching, who have fought against the Islamic State, have quickly assumed police and even administrative functions in the locations where they had taken up arms. So at the same time, they strengthened their grip on local and national economies, diverting hundreds of millions from the reconstruction business. This means that anybody willing to engage in economic activities in Iraq would be faced with negotiating with that kind of groups. I will conclude with that this situation has made the state even more incapable than before of providing for the most basic services, namely electricity, which is generally the main trigger for protests in Iraq, particularly in the summer. So now the demonstrations not only target this incapacity of the state, but the whole system, which makes the state incapable. The protesters are contesting the very core of the post-2003 political order, that is sectarian quotas for administrative appointments, partisanship, nepotism, political violence, impunity, as well as Iranian and American infringements, both on the country's sovereignty. I think my time is up, so I would just like to say that, in my opinion, and we can discuss that, I would be happy to, Iraq is not a failed state, as we can read it often. It is rather a captive state. It is caught in the contradictions of the processes on which it was rebuilt, starting in 2003, and to overcome these contradictions will take at least a great deal of time and political will. But in the meantime, Iraq, and I deeply believe that, Iraq remains a land in need for ambitious initiatives. It is blessed with unique assets waiting for their full potential to be realized, and blessed with the people aspiring to be given better access to public services and functioning economy. So I think really it is a challenging but very promising environment for anyone willing to take part in its economic renewal. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. This was perfect. My dear friend Yesar, at last but not least, it's you.
Well, thank you. Hello to all your distinguished guests again. I think Robin has done a great job at looking at some of the challenges the country is having and touched upon a couple of things in the energy sector. So what I will do is I will look at some immediate term developments. So starting with some good news, some bad news, then focus on the biggest challenge that is coming for the government, which is the summer, and talk about, the biggest deal between Iraq and France right now, which is the Total Energies mega deal. So let's start with the positives. So Iraqi crude oil export revenues have been rising with easing OPEC plus restrictions on production, in addition to higher oil prices due to the current geopolitical conditions in the world, especially in Europe, in addition to a tighter market back in 2021, end of 2021 and beginning of early 2022. So all of these factors have led to higher oil prices and by extension, of course, higher revenues for Iraq. So in April, Iraq's oil exports went to a 3-year high, 3.38 million barrels per day. And this is due to the reason that there were a few outages back in March, which they have been passed. The revenues, they have increased all the way to 10.55 billion in April. So that is a bit of a dipping compared to March, which was 10.91 billion. But, still March revenues were almost 11 billion, and they were the highest on record in Iraq's history. So there is also good news from the north, because we have mentioned the northern provinces. So Kirkuk usually produces 100,000 barrels per day. That is exported through the Kurdistan pipeline to Ceyhan on the Turkish Mediterranean coast. This is now back online after a few mechanical problems that led to exports dropping sharply in 2021. Iraq also has restarted trucking oil to Jordan after almost a 2-month hiatus. Of course, Baghdad, supplies Amman with oil at a $16 per barrel discount. So what is the main point here? The main point is, if revenues hold at these levels for the remainder of the year, then they would not just smash the existing record of 94 billion that we had back in 2012 for revenues, cumulative revenues for that year, but they could also go all the way to 110 billion this year, which my colleagues and I at MENA estimated. But government officials in Iraq even are going for higher figures at 150 billion. This will allow the Iraqis to not simply spend on that, expensive wage bill that Robin mentioned earlier, but also could help them move some of the projects that are needed within the infrastructure that have been delayed by years of underinvestment, basically. So let's talk about the underinvestment. So what are the bad news now? Just looking at the Iraqi oil and gas sector, it is coming out of years of underinvestment. And this happened through 2 cycles. The first one was in 2014 with the oil price downturn. And then there was little to no time to recover, and you had the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. And in both of these instances, what happened is that the government had to prioritize spending, fiscal budget spending, over investing in maintaining and increasing the production capacity of the oil sector. So now this is the case in many other OPEC countries, not just Iraq. But what is special about Iraq is, let's remember what Louki and Anne were talking about in 2014. We had something called what the World Bank basically coined as the double shock. So we had oil price downturn plus the rise of ISIS, and it was very expensive for us to, deal with all of that, and the government had to intervene. But so where we are, as of last week, OPEC plus restrictions have been eased further, and Iraq has an allocation of 4.5 million barrels per day. Reaching that level is still questionable, but there are many projects that are coming online in fields like Majnoon, West Garna 2, and some of the Diqar province fields like Nasiriyah, Gharraf, and others. And of course, adding to the good news from Kirkuk. Now, what is the greatest challenge in terms of oil exports and by extension revenues is that Iraq is almost reaching its export infrastructure capacity. So in April, the exports from Basra in the south of Iraq, where the terminals on the Arabian Gulf are, it reached 3.27 million barrels per day, which was just 30,000 barrels per day below the effective capacity, which is 3.3 million barrels per day. So this buffer is eroding, and this is a big question mark. Now, Baghdad is planning to add a few pumping stations here and there for 250,000 barrels per day soon, but we do not know when. And there is also a crucial sea line, underwater line, that they are planning to bring in by end of 2023, according to officials. Now, why am I mentioning all of this? Is because these are the uncertainties that we have in terms of, Iraq maximizing its oil exports, and by extension, all of those revenues that are needed for spending on the economy. Now, what is the most important immediate term challenge for the Iraqi government and Iraq as a whole? Summer. So I think everyone here has been to Iraq, hopefully not in July, and soaring temperatures are usually a problem. Temperatures could reach all the way above 50 degrees centigrade, and this usually leads to an uptick in electricity demand. And despite spending billions of dollars on the power system, Iraq's electricity system is dilapidated in a way. So you have something called peak supply to demand, which goes all the way to a shortage of 9 gigawatts in the most hottest days of summer in July, and this leads to plant cuts throughout the country, and by extension, as Robin I think was mentioning, this leads to protests, as shown in the past. And so summer usually is a test for every government. So what about this government? Well, this government is kind of in a tricky situation financially, let's say. Now, the good news is that Iraq is getting money, but can Iraq spend that money? As of the end of December, which is the end of the financial year in Iraq, Iraq has no fiscal budget, because Anne was mentioning there are lots of games politically, and government formation has been delayed, and now spending is curtailed. And given the nature of Iraq's electricity system, where you have to spend on maintaining and preparing all of your gas plants and turbines for the summer, for a variety of technical reasons, including fuel switching and others, which I will mention later on, you have to spend a lot of money on getting your power plants ready, on preparing. So if your spending is curtailed, you are doing emergency spending right now, and it is not as effective as when you have full budgets. So nevertheless, the Iraqi government has taken a number of steps. Now, The success of these steps will really depend on, how hot the weather is and how large the demand is and how prepared the government is anyway. So some of these steps include, in 2021, the Ministry of Electricity refurbished around 20 non-operational gas turbines with an overall capacity of 2.7 gigawatts through a credit insurance mechanism with ECI, which is the Ittihad Credit Insurance. It's the Export Credit Agency of the United Arab Emirates. They took all of these turbines to Jebel Ali for refurbishment. Now they are also working on a second mechanism which could help with another 1.5 gigawatts. As of last week, the European Union has given initial approval for Turkey to export 500 megawatts of electricity to northern provinces in Iraq. So this is very important for stabilization in provinces like Mosul, Kirkuk, and others, for them to have electricity and to support the rebuilding of those provinces. But the elephant in the room, Iraq is dependent on Iran. We cannot change that, not anytime soon, at least. So during these summer months, when Iraq needs almost all available capacity, 40% of that should be from Iran. Now that comes through 4 interconnection lines, high voltage lines that we have between Iraq and Iran. And for your information, since the end of 2019, Iraqi and Iranian power systems are synchronized, and also 2 gas pipelines between both countries. So when you put all of that gas and electricity in power terms, it makes around 40% of the available capacity. But the imports from Iran of power of energy, let's say, have been unreliable. Now that is for a number of reasons. Reason number 1 is the Iraqi government's inability to pay. So there are almost $4 billion in due payments to the Iranian government sitting at an escrow account at TBI, the Trade Bank of Iraq. But since the financial sector in Iran is sanctioned, you cannot move that money and you cannot pay the Iranians. So even if Iraq gets all of that money from oil exports, and Iraq is, by the way, is prioritizing paying Iran because they need the electricity in summer. But still, that technical issue with payment stands in the way. Now, the second problem is Iran itself. So Iran has an uptick in demand in both summer and winter now. So it's becoming cross-seasonal. So in summer, Iraq is expecting 9 gigawatt shortage. Iran is it's a bigger country. Remember, they are expecting 10 to 15 gigawatts in shortages in summer in terms of power. Last winter, they had shortages of gas at 200 million CFD. And if Iraq is not paying, Iran is not going to prioritize it over its domestic sector. And this is one of the reasons why payment has not been done. Nevertheless, the Iraqi government, through the last few weeks, they have been working on lobbying Tehran, and a few things happened. So first of all, they renegotiated the tariff, the electricity import tariff with Tavernier, which is the state grid operator in Iran. They also reached a new gas deal with Iran. And now they also have accepted a proposed payment mechanism by the Central Bank of Iran. So will this work? We don't know. But the Iraqis, they see what's happening and they have no other choice but Iran immediately available. Again, Iran has what we call as a first mover advantage in the Iraqi market. But there are other plans on the long term. Iraq wants to interconnect with Jordan. GE is working on the interconnection. Iraq wants to interconnect with the GCCIA, which is the GCC's common network, which is it interconnects the 6 grids. So the Kuwait Fund for Arab Development has put the first tranche of the loan for that interconnection, building a new substation in Wafra in Kuwait to interconnect with Zor and Dilfal. Also, there are plans to interconnect with Saudi Arabia, although that is a bit technically complex, but feasibility is being worked on. But more recently, which I'm laughing because it's a bit economically not very wise. Iraq is trying to or is going to sign a contract to import LNG from Qatar, and that is going to be quite expensive for Iraq given all the gas prices that we have in the world right now. Also, Iraq has to get an FSRU, which is a vessel to receive the liquefied gas and turn it into regasified gas in a way, and that it's going to be a lot of expenses, and it's a very small amount compared to other countries that are trying to get LNG at this point, like Germany and others. So we will see if Iraq is going to be successful within that feat. The other thing that Iraq is focusing on, and there is a lot of investment coming into it, is renewables. So Iraq has approved around 2.5 gigawatts in IPP contracts, so independent power producer contracts, including, firms like Scatec, Norwegian Scatec, and 1 gigawatt for Total Energies through the Total mega deal, 2 gigawatts for Masdar, Abu Dhabi's Masdar, and is also working on securing financing for an EPC plus F project with Power China for 2 gigawatts. So all in all, they're looking at around 4.5 gigawatts to add, but that is going to take time. There is also 1 gigawatt for Aqua Power, the Saudi developer, but talks have been stretched all the way back to 2019, and there is a problem with the tariff interconnection with Saudi. These two things are interconnected with each other. So this brings us to the Total Energies deal. But when we look at the Total Energies deal, we have to basically focus on one very important point. Iraq's biggest problem is that it flares its own gas. So recently, if you have been reading the news or reports, the World Bank put its gas flaring tracking report, and Iraq is still the world's second largest gas flarer, just after Russia. So Iraq's power fleet is actually geared towards power generation from gas. 60% of their turbines, of Iraq turbines, are gas turbines. But the problem is that they flare 50% of whatever gas that they produce. So when the world is looking for every molecule of gas out there, Iraq is just happily burning them up in the sky. So their current capacity is 1.5 billion CFD. They are trying to add 2.5 billion until the year 2027. So where does Total fit in? Total, part of their plan, they have something called the GGIP, the Gas Growth Integrated Project, which is a 600 million CFD gas processing facility, in South Ratawi in Basra, which will add 600 million CFD of gas processing, which will, if you convert it into power terms, will help produce 3 gigawatts of gas. So, of electricity. So those 3 gigawatts right now, they are being flared in the sky, creating greenhouse gas emissions. So it's great. The package also includes other things, that are important for the Iraqi energy sector. One is developing the Ratawi oil field, increasing its capacity from 85,000 to 210,000. That's going to cost around 3 billion. So the GGIP is $2 billion, by the way. The solar component that I was talking about for $1 billion, and there is a $3 billion, what we call as a mini CSSP. It's a water treatment facility that basically takes seawater from the Arabian Gulf, treats it and injects it into oil wells to sustain pressures and maintain Iraqi oil production, which is, by the way, facing some, or is going to start facing some declines because of pressure issues at reservoirs. So that is also a very key project for Iraqi economic well-being, because sustain oil production, sustain income, and so on. But, and here is the problem, the political climate right now is quite problematic. Almost all investments, I'm sorry to say, are not moving forward until a new government comes in. There is a lot of bureaucratic contract signing and so on. So this is not just the Total Energies deal, but in general. So everyone is in this kind of waiting mode, trying to see what happens. But a final message on the Total Energies deal. The Total Energies deal is what we could consider a win-win for Iraq for two reasons. Reason number one, for Total itself, the firm's CEO, Patrick Pouyanné, has been trying to push this brown-green hybrid projects. So the first model of which is this Iraq deal. So you have a deal that packages together green components like solar, water treatment, and others with with the brown components like oil production and gas production. So putting these two together gets you this. So it is important for the French, for Total, to have this working in Iraq. For Iraq itself, it's very important to have a super major energy company coming back into the energy sector after Shell left in 2018, Occidental left in 2015, and more recently ExxonMobil left with arbitration ongoing with the Iraqi government. So, I mean, this is just an overview, and I'll be more than happy to answer any other questions. Shahid, back to you.
Thank you, Yesar. Thank you. This was perfect as always, and I really thank you all for this very holistic and original overview about Iraqi situation from a different perspective. I'll start by my own questions, because since you are my friends, I'll take this privilege and start by my question. Then we'll take the question from the audience. Louki, I had a question for you. I really appreciated your overview about the French-Iraqi relations. And my question was about the upcoming Emmanuel Macron's mandate as a president. How do you think Iraq will be placed in his foreign policy?
Thank you, Shazad, for the question. I think it's quite difficult to tell if he's going to, for example, reinforce the relationships, the commercial relationships between France and Iraq. What is quite noticeable is that there was a special agent from the ODAS, from the ODAS, that was mandated for Saudi Arabia, and that wished to extend his mandate to Iraq. And Emmanuel Macron followed the advice from the Direction Générale de l'Armement and stopped this process. So it was regarding the state-to-state contract for like arm contracts, but regarding the more frequent classical commercial contracts between French entrepreneurs and Iraq, I think he will try to extend and to reinforce the relationship. I think a trip to Iraq for the president is very unlikely to happen before like two more years, because or otherwise it would be a really unprecedented. I also feel that the announcement that Anne mentioned of the opening of French consulate in Mosul is going to fluidify, like to make a more easy and easier and like more fast the connection between faster and easier the connection between the French diplomatic body and the Iraqi body. But regarding regarding the topic of the entrepreneurship, I'm not sure he will do anything really specific during this mandate, because it's a bit blocked between the interests of the other countries of the area, and I think he doesn't want to make it worse, given that the previous the actual minister for foreign affairs, Jean Le Drian, is likely to leave, and that Jean Le Drian is not known for making relationships with countries of the area better. So maybe it will depend also on the new French ministry, that maybe will be a fusion of the armies ministry and the foreign affairs ministry.
Okay, this is a quite interesting insight. I had a question about this idea of the project of having an airport in Mosul, and I know that France was a bit invested in this idea. Maybe 8 months ago, when I was in Iraq, I spoke with one of the French representatives there, and he told me that it's a very serious idea. Even if I told him that, for instance, the Kurdish Authority might see an airport in Mosul as something competing the airport in Erbil, and he told me that, well, we told our Kurdish friends that if we don't do the airport in Mosul, the Turks will come, the Turkish people would come and airport out of place. So
yeah.
Would you project having an airport in Mosul?
I think it's quite likely that the French institutional body continues to support this project, because I feel that like the relationship between Kurdistan and France is good, but at the same time, as you mentioned, there is also the Turkish parameter that we have to take into account. In March in 2022 of this year, there was only one French and even a European and even Occidental pavilion in the Baghdad defense exhibition, and it was the Air France pavilion. So I feel that the aviation companies and specifically Air France are really wanting to improve their relationship with Iraq, and I think the Mosul Airport project may not be realized like during this year, but I think it's on a good way to be done.
Thank you, Louki. Thank you. I have a question also for Anne. I really appreciated your. I'm not surprising you, huh? You were expecting my question. Your articulated and, as always, refined reflections on Iraq and the Middle East in general. I had a question about the place of France in the Middle East, in Iraq, with competitors like Turkey and Russia. How do you see French foreign policy in Iraq regarding these competitors? Do you think Iraq has a special place in this sort of regional competition that we can sometimes follow?
I think that specifically, I'm not his advisor, but I think Emmanuel Macron's strategy in, confirming and helping Iraq to position itself as the regional pivot that it used to be and that it has to be. I think it's perfectly well thought, and it's because we need Iraq for a number of things. I think it's Louki-Géronimo who tackled this. The main issue is, of course, fighting against terrorism, and we need to have a sort of clearer and deeper relationship with Iraq regarding this. Also because it can also stabilize and help France get into the issue of Syria with Iraq. And regarding Turkey and Russia nowadays, with the war in Ukraine, the cards are sort of reshuffled in every way, in every sense. It's very difficult to assess how the countries in the Middle East are going to react in the long term. We've seen a sort of dual reaction that was really strongly reflected in the Gulf states' position. It's just let me just do this aparté so that I can come back to Iraq. So we've seen that countries with which France has really strong relationships, namely the UAE, but also Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, have had a sort of ambiguous position regarding Russia in the Ukraine war, and we could also see that it was reflected in the different positionings and the different votings at the United Nations. So in a way, I think it's very important for France and for Macron to reinforce, to strengthen the relationship with Iraq for a number of reasons, because it sort of balances the relationship, the fluctuating relationship that we could have with Gulf countries, as related to this really specific strategic context. But also it can help stabilize the region in the long run. I don't remember who mentioned this, but Iraq has also started to build bridges and to reinforce its relationship with its neighbors, namely Egypt and Jordan. And to that regard, specifically in the Syrian file, if I may speak about it this way, it will be crucial to maintain a relationship with Iraq and to strengthen Iraq's balancing acts in the Middle East. Hope it answers your question.
It was perfect. I had a second question about when you spoke about your fruitful exchanges with a lot of Iraqi, especially the Iraqi civil society. You said that they were, and this is what I've already heard, that they were very interested in France, its representation also.
Right.
What do you think? What does attract them in France and its cultural symbols?
I think, as I told you, I was really surprised about it, but the Fifth Republic, the constitution of the Fifth Republic is a sort of hit in the Arab world and also in Iraq. I was really, because the part of the institutional stalemate that we're witnessing at the moment comes from the fact that the 2005 constitution in Iraq establishes a parliamentary system. So they understand very well how Germany, for instance, works, or Belgium, or even England. But the France in Europe is a sort of rarity. It's a sort of exception, institutional exception, and it's always fascinated people in the Arab world, as I learned when I went there. And I think this is also because they can partly relate. You know, the Fifth Republic was enacted, enforced in a very specific political context, with the instability of the Fourth Republic having driven to a very unstable situation politically in France. Also, it was in the midst of the Algerian War. De Gaulle was called back to sort of save the country and to sort of deal with the Algerian War. And to some extent, they think, and I think they do it wisely, they sort of draw a parallel with what they are living at the moment, even though the political system is really, really completely different, and the context is obviously different. And I do think also that the fact that France was not involved in the 2003 invasion was there was a dual reaction to this. Some people may think that France did not want to get involved and so did not participate in liberating Iraq from the dictatorship. But on the other hand, people praised France for not meddling in Iraqi affairs, creating a state of affairs that is to this day very, very damaging, and has been very damaging. I really don't really explain why exactly, but we have a sort of, we have credits. We have political and cultural credits in Iraq, at least among some circles. And I think it's something that entrepreneurs and companies should keep in mind when they come there, always in a very humble way. I believe it's always a good advice.
Thank you. Thank you. I would add something on what you said. I've noticed, as a French Iraqi, so I've noticed some common interest, especially in the place of culture. I mean, I'm used to follow the activities of the French embassy in Iraq. Mm. They are really invested in promoting, for instance, book readings, public theaters, and these activities. I think it rings a bell for Iraqis, because both countries give a certain specific importance to culture, reading, theater, intellectual production, and both countries speak to each other in this situation. So, but thank you again for your...
Probably, yeah. You're welcome.
I have a question also for Robin. Where are you, Robin? I'm not finding you. Are you hearing me, Robin?
Yeah.
Thank you again for your reflections about Iraq, and especially the disparities between governorates and regions. I felt there was a certain you spoke about a certain contradiction. You spoke about in the first time about this easing the mobility in Iraq from one region to another, and at the same time you said that there is this inability to have a deep knowledge about Iraq. I'm surprised to see that, because usually easing mobility and traveling from one country to another, from one place to another, should enable people, researchers, experts, people interested in Iraq to have a better knowledge of the country, because you can move from one place to another and see things by yourself. How could you explain that? How could it be easy to visit Iraq and at the same time Iraq is still described as a chaos, as you said, or failing country?
Well, I think the answer is in some ways quite obvious. First, because Iraq suffers from a very bad image. People, when you refer to Iraq, you have images of violence and destruction coming to mind immediately. So Iraq is not considered as a prime destination for tourism, for example. Although this is changing a bit. It is changing a bit, not really in France yet, but you can. There is a whole ecosystem of entrepreneurs on tourism developing in Iraq today. Couch surfing. It's mainly for now intra-Iraq or regional tourism, but it could expand. And of course, Iraq has a lot to promote and to offer. And as for researchers, and well, you have plenty of journalists, plenty of humanitarians, plenty of NGOs, plenty of diplomats in Iraq. Researchers a bit less, because well, we a bit constrained also by our rules of France. France is kind of an exception in the university system because well, we're being recorded, but I don't care. But because everything is a mess in French university, we're not really monitored on what we're doing or not. So theoretically, I'm not supposed to go to Iraq, but I can. But I go anyway, and nobody blames me until there is a problem. So in other countries, the control is much more tight on students, on PhD students, on researchers. But we, for structural reasons, can afford to play on the gray areas. But you're right. There are not that many researchers. There's not that much research on Iraq per se in France, especially for historical reasons, because there are post mandate or post-colonial effects which make French researchers working more on Lebanon, on Syria, and more British researchers working on Iraq, for example. And when they have been working in the past few years mostly on the north or on Kurdistan, or because it was kind of trendy on terrorism and the Islamic State. So there was a rise in terrorism studies and war studies. On the rest of Iraq, much less. But at the same time, and I think this is much more important, you have a whole roaring, it's the third time I use the term ecosystem in this webinar, so I will stop, but it will be the last time, of Iraqi researchers and research centers, very good research centers in Baghdad, in Basra, maybe in Mosul. It's been a long time since I've been there, and in Erbil, people working and researching their own country and society, and reaching out to partners in the world, and particularly in the West. And I think that is our responsibility to respond to that, reaching out and to collaborate with them. But there is still much to do, and it's a fascinating country. So please go and visit Iraq, either as a researcher or to study or to enjoy this country.
Where would you advise them to go first? Goma.
And Baghdad, of course.
Of course. Why? And maybe Basra also, Mosul, Erbil.
That's right. It's been a long time, but to my opinion, that's right, because for the past 10 years, 15 years, Erbil has been the hub for the since 2014. Erbil has been the hub for NGOs, for humanitarians, for diplomats. Now it's slowly shifting to Baghdad. That is, all the NGOs which had offices in Erbil now for a year or a few months, or establishing in Baghdad. I think the next move will be Basra. Not now, not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow, because there is a huge potential of development. It will take time, but I think Basra will probably, if things stay the same, if there is no big crisis coming up, Basra is likely to be the next point of anchorage of foreign presence and investment there. And humanitarian NGOs are already considering it.
By the way, I should add that I have noticed a sort of quite recent phenomenon. I'm seeing a lot of new influencers on Instagram from the Western countries going to Iraq and filming about recording their travel and their journey in Iraq. And I think this is quite, I don't know if it's supported by the government or not, but at least I'm seeing it a lot on Instagram. Do you have any idea about this? No, it's new for you.
There was an article in the Middle East I think about this. Mostly Anglo-Saxon tourists for some reason.
Yeah, I think mostly Anglo-Saxon, but I expect this phenomenon to get developed. Sorry, please.
Sorry, Shada, just to add something. I think this is basically it builds up on what Robin said earlier with the introduction of visa-free entry for those who carry Western passports. It has helped many of those world travelers who had Iraq on their list, but they couldn't go to Iraq because of the visa restrictions and the security restrictions.
Yes.
So they have decided, well, visa is off. I can, the visa is okay now. Security, I'm going to take my chances. And I've watched a lot of videos, by the way.
Yeah.
And I think by now they are realizing that, security is not a problem. Maybe it has been over-exaggerated. I think Robin and I agree somehow on that with caution. That it has been over-exaggerated because it has become a business provision service at the same time, So anyway, but I think that's the point.
Sorry, are you optimistic about this point? I mean, does it have a positive impact on Iraq's image?
Yeah, of course. I mean, listen, you have been to Iraq, I have been to Iraq. You can always travel throughout the country. The people are friendly and nice, and as long as you're respecting their traditions and culture, and carry yourself in a very humble and nice way. Last time in 2019, before the visa restrictions being lifted, I had a British friend from Kent, of all places, who decided to bring his wife, land in Najaf, and take a taxi, and go to the marshes. And he was just taking taxis and coming to me in Baghdad. And in Baghdad, I was like, man, I need to bring a few friends to protect you and things like that. But he was like, no, we are all good. And that was 2019, right before, before all of this happened, So we ended up visiting Baghdad, all the places and so on, just a foreigner and one Iraqi guy and his wife. And I didn't need to bring many friends with me, or anything. It was all good,
Things are coming to a normal situation, let's say.
Yeah.
Yesar, thank you for I really appreciated your reflection about the situation, especially the economic situation on Iraq, especially on the energy topic. I have noted a question, but it's also posed by one of the person in the audience. But I'll cite both questions. So he says, or she says, what's perspective for Total in Iraq regarding the current situation? For you, Yesar, what do you think about it?
It's a very difficult question. And I usually tend to be, what I do usually is just lay out the information for you and make you come to a conclusion. How about that, Total was smart enough to sign the contracts physically before the elections. So the government was not a caretaker when they signed it. So this is number one. Number two, they signed with state-owned companies under the Ministry of Oil for each and every component. So every component has its own contract and its own company that basically signed it. So in a way, it's a valid contract that has no issues. Now, I don't know about the details of the contract, which require a lot of negotiations and things like that, and require a sitting government with full authority to finalize these details. So this is a big unknown to all of us. So this is the issue. Now, so like every other company interest in Iraq, things are slow at the moment. until the political class comes to its consensus and forms a government. So everything is slow. Everyone is just watching. On the other end, we have the parliament. So Anne was saying something which is important. Out of the three levels of government that we have, the three branches. So we have the legislative branch, we have the executive, and we have the presidency. So the presidency, we have nobody, it's vacant. The executive, the prime minister, is vacant. Mr. Kadhimi is a caretaker by the end of the day. But the only person that is there is actually the head of the legislature, Mohammed al-Halbousi. He's there, he's fully valid, he's fully legal. So, and this also makes all the MPs that he has under him as fully legal, although the sessions are not really fully legal. That is something to discuss later on. But the point is, many MPs have been making a lot of noise on how was this contract signed. So that is a problem going forward, because there is one side of this contract that is quite positive, I would say, for Iraq. The Ratawi development that I was talking about, the oil production development from this field from 85,000 to 210,000, is going to be done under something called the DPC, a development and production contract. And the DPC is an upgrade to the contracts that usually Iraq offers to oil and gas companies, which are service contracts. They are termed technical service contracts. And usually the TSCs, the technical service contracts, they offer very marginal profit to oil companies, international oil companies. And this is one of the main reasons that many international oil companies want to leave Iraq. The DPC is a bit of an upgrade. It offers better marginal profitability, better profitability actually. And it is a step that Iraq has to take anyway, because it has to attract foreign investment into its sector. But the problem with the DPC is that historically it has been challenged by parliament, by many MPs for many reasons, political and otherwise. And Total now is, in a way, its full weight is on that contract. So the good news is that there was a court ruling back in, I think, 1 month or 2 months ago, that basically, it's a long story. I don't want to bother anybody or bore anyone with it, but the DPCs were part of something called the fifth licensing round. The fifth licensing round didn't go ahead because of the Integrity Commission and the MPs putting a case against it. Now that case has been wrapped up in a way, so DPC is okay to go, let's say, but it's still questionable whether MPs are going to make more trouble. So that is a source of risk. The delays within Iraq's government formation is a source of risk, but, and this is this is the golden part, where they say you have your weight in gold. Total has a contract, so whoever is going to come next, it's not easy to get out of that contract, and I don't think anybody wants to get out of the contract, because by the end of the day, you have a big company coming over, promising to invest in the country in developing important aspects. Water treatment, as I said, very important for Iraq's long-term production, even immediate term, gas capture and solar. So you have a bunch of good projects under this project.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
I have two questions. If they can be answered in 1 minute or 30 seconds, would be perfect.
Sorry, yeah.
Because we're running time. So I had a question about the pending contracts. With Total and French airport company. About projects in Thales or Alstom. Do you have any insight about this? Can someone speak us about this?
I'm not sure about Thales, but
this was a question by one of the journalists assisting from Intelligence Online. So asked if, let me just take the question. She asked if there's any French contracts pending in Iraq besides Total and besides Total and ADP Mosul, such as radars from Thales or the Baghdad Metro by Alstom.
maybe Louki knows more about the radars, you know.
Yeah.
But in terms of the Baghdad Metro, as far as I know, they will tender the allocation for it in the upcoming budget.
Okay.
And this seems to be, you know, tailored down for Elistam anyway. To be honest with you, I believe we should do a holistic new urban planning of Baghdad and then see where to place the metro, because, you know, you don't want to have a metro going into, you know, not very nice places. Anyway.
Louki, do you have about this?
I think Fanny is speaking about the Thales Groundmaster's radars. Well, to be fair, I think that we have to take into account the international context and the war in Ukraine, because Thales was selling this Groundmaster's radars against the S-400s, the Russian S-400s, and I think that there is at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, there were some groups that were praising Vladimir Putin action in Iraq, as you know. No, there seem to be less public manifestations, public speakings in favor of Russia. But still, I think that we have to take this into account, and I think it can slow down the sales of Thales in Iraq, because I mean, some of the Iraqi people that we met when we were in Iraq with my previous employer were praising Russia for like an image of virilism, of machismo quite a bit, and I think that this link is disturbing the link between Thales and Iraq, even though I think they will not let it sleep, and Thales is going to try to keep these markets. But for the moment, I think it's a bit slow.
My last question, either for Anne or Robin. So it was about how Iraq is observing the French political scene regarding the political situation in Iraq and the Iranian influence. So how does Iraq looks to France, sees France and its positioning, I think, with Iran? This is how I understand the question.
I'm sorry, Shadil, it's hard for me to answer this one. I think France in general in the Middle East, and specifically President Macron, has an image of being very, very close to Gulf monarchies and defending sort of their point of view within the Iranian nuclear discussions. So I think in Iraq it's kind of the same, but maybe Robin, you have an insight.
How do we see France from Iraq, especially with the Iranian influence as it is posed?
Well, it's very difficult to answer because it really depends on who you're talking about. If you're talking about political elites, from which party, if we're talking of the Iraqi streets, if something like that exists. So I don't know. What I know is, being a French citizen, going on my own and meeting with Iraqi people there, I come and with how would I say that? But there is no there is a good a priori to me meeting people. My Frenchness is not something that impedes me of working on meeting people. On the contrary, usually it makes people kind of happy that I'm not American, and then that because once again that's what I was talking about when we discussed that earlier. But Iraqi people not working in embassies or not working with journalists or in the green zone don't meet many Europeans actually, because they're not allowed to go out or they have curfews when they live outside of the green zone. So people are usually very curious, very generous, and very nice, and I've never encountered any problem. But that's really all I can say about that.
Thank you, Robin. I think we arrived to the end. I would like, in the name of the Global D1, thank Anne, Louki, Yesar, and Robin for your very rich reflections on the situation in Iraq and your expertise sharing with us. I also would like to thank the audience for being here. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.